Welcome, everyone. So excited to bring you another episode of the #1 aquarium podcast on the internet, and we stand by that because we believe it. Joined here today, as I am every week, with the wonderful Professor Jason Adams from Primetime Aquatics.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Yep, topic is going to be awesome. We are discussing canister filters, and it's going to be cool. I know you've been a big fan of canister filters for a long time. You've done all kinds of videos on them. As for me, I would say I'm more of a recent convert to canister filters, more out of necessity, but now that I am using them, I certainly understand some of their advantages, but I actually think this may be a video where possibly we have a difference of opinion on said filtration. We'll see.
Okay. Hey, I'm always up for a good debate because I know you and I are good enough friends where we can disagree on something and still be friends. Isn't that interesting?
Whatever happened to the Tank Talk podcast? Remember that episode about canister filters? Yeah, it just spiraled from there. Man, that got out of hand. I mean, that got out of hand really fast.
That escalated quickly. There's the movie reference. I know that
lay
one.
Low for a while.
No, it will certainly not come to blows like that. But, hey, a little healthy debate never hurt anybody. But yes, I am a really big fan of canister filters. And I got to say this, I alluded to it last week, and I'm going to say it again. I am going to make a statement today that is going to quite possibly be the most controversial thing I've ever said. Ever. There's going to be people that, listen, I'm going to be putting friendships on the line. I'm going to be putting relationships with manufacturers on the line. It's going to be hardcore, the statement that I'm going to make. But I believe it. I believe it very strongly. And you just have to stay tuned to find out what that is. I won't make you wait all the way to the very end, I promise you. But before I get to that big statement that's going to break the internet, I want to talk about, I don't need to talk about what canister filters are. I think we're all beyond that. I don't need to introduce the audience to canister filters. But I do want to talk about how there are a lot of people that are intimidated by this style of filter. Whether it's the sophistication of them, whether it's, you're taking the water out of the aquarium and bringing it down to a filter, processing it, sending it back up. There's hoses involved. There's all this stuff. It's all too fancy for me. There's a lot of people that are intimidated by them. What I hope is that by the end of this episode, you will no longer be intimidated by them. You'll realize that it is a very, very efficient way of filtering an aquarium, and could be argued that it's the best type of filtration for an aquarium. We're going to go through the pros, the cons. My list of pros might be different from Jason's, and the cons might be different from his too. That'll be a fun little debate, but we're going to cover everything there is about aquariums. But I want to start it off, Jason, by asking you a question. What size aquarium do you think is the size that a fish keeper would be looking at saying, okay, it's time for me to get a little bit more serious about my filtration. It's time for me to maybe upgrade to a canister filter. When should a fish keeper start considering a canister? And when would you draw the line and say, okay, from here up, you must at least have a canister filter?
That's a really great question, because I would say, and I know you're going to hit all these later, so I'm not going to go into any one in great detail, but I would say there's a lot more to choosing a filtration system than the size of the aquarium itself. There's a lot of other considerations. Now, if we're talking just based on size, I like hang-on back filters certainly through 125 gallons. And again, keep in mind, I've got canisters on these tanks behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, I've got a couple 125 gallons. I've got a 50-gallon low boy behind me that is running a canister filter. So my reason for selecting canister filters for all the tanks behind me in the fish gallery has nothing to do with fish tank size, but other things that I wanted to see that I know you're going to hit on later. But I think once you get beyond a 125, maybe into the 6-foot 150s, certainly by the time you get to the 220s, the 240s, you might want to start looking at canister filters for a number of different reasons. Partly just because of, and you're going to touch on this later, the intakes and the returns and where they're located. the volume that you have in a large canister filter relative to even the largest hang-on back filters. So yeah, I would say by about 150, 6 foot 150, you're probably thinking maybe there's another way to do this.
Okay. We're not far off in our opinions. What I think, and you hit the nail right on the head when you said there's more factors than just the size of the aquarium, because a 75-gallon aquarium full of imbunas, that has 26 imbunas in it, is going to be a very different situation than a 75-gallon aquarium with, 16 neon tetras in it. I mean, it's very different. And, but to me, I think when you get into that 75 to 90, you should start thinking about it. It should start being something that you're like, you know, can what I have now handle it? Can a hang on back handle it? I'm a humongous fan of hang on back filters. We discussed them a few weeks ago. I'm a big fan of hang on backs. Can my system handle it? Or because of what I'm going to be stocking my 75 or 90 gallon tank, should I consider upgrading? But to me, where it becomes not even up for debate is once you hit that 125 gallon mark. I don't know. The 6-foot tank to me screams canister filter, and it's for more than just the volume of water that canisters process. We will get into all of that. A 6-foot aquarium is very wide, and so that's one of the reasons why I would go with canister filters. But I also want to be very clear before we move on here. Everybody knows the number one, the most popular, the Rolls Royce of canister filters is the FX series from Fluval. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial when I say that. I've got several of them right now running in this fish room. I love that filter. I've got all 3 sizes. Love them. They are the best in the business as far as I'm concerned. When we talk about canister filters in this podcast, we are not exclusively talking about the FX series from Fluval. There's Oase, there's Seche, there's Marineland, there's a whole lot of manufacturers. There's Eheim, which we don't see as much of around here anymore. Then you have a lot of the Chinese manufacturers like Sun and Aquatop and things like that. We're talking about these all. I pretty much, I could say confidently that all of the pros that I'm going to talk about and all of the cons are all of them. It's not just, we're not just talking about the Fluvals. And Fluval also doesn't just have the FX series. They've got the 700 series too. So there's plenty of canisters to talk about. I don't think we need to do a what's your favorite canister filter at the end of this podcast like we did the hang on backs, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I think I just made it clear which one my favorite is, but are you on the same page as me, or do you have different ones going on behind you?
In terms of
what brand?
What
brand? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, I mean, you're going to have strengths and weaknesses for each canister filter, but for the most part, they all have inherent strengths and weaknesses, regardless of the name you slap on the side. I mean, I would caution anybody, if you're going to go really budget canister filter, that there's risk there in terms of seals and potential leaks and things like that. There's a reason why some of the canister filters cost more than others. It's one of those things like we talked about with hang-on back filters. Sometimes you get what you pay for. So
Sure.
Those more expensive canister filters are more expensive because the motors are a little bit better, and the fitting is better, and the gaskets are better, and the way that the thing moves water is going to be more efficient. And one of the things I'm sure you'll probably hit on later is the gallons per hour that is plastered on the side of a box, where some of those more expensive canister filters is probably going to be a little bit closer to reality than some of the others.
Well, they are, but then again, there's also very strict guidelines as to how many gallons that is going to process. It'll process that many gallons under very specific conditions, which are pretty much never found in a home aquarium, meaning the hose is only that long and all of this, there are factors involved. But I would just go by, the gallons per hour are not always what it says on the box, even on the highest end ones, but you're much more likely to get that kind of performance by the higher end ones and stuff like that. I don't think there's a better example of getting what you pay for than aquarium filters as a whole, not just canisters, but certainly with hang on the backs too. But the first thing, as we get into, should we do the cons first or the pros? I kind of like to start with pros, but what do you think?
Well, I've got a long. So here's the deal: you've probably got a long list of pros, and I have a long list of potential cons. So, and
Well,
I've got pros too.
my list of pros is longer than my list of cons. So maybe either way we
And
go,
I
we're
would
going to
say
have
that
fun
my
with
list of cons is probably longer than my list of pros. Why don't
Oh
we do
boy.
this? Why don't you come up with a pro, and I'll come up with a con,
it. Okay.
and then and if we have leftovers, then we can just randomly state the leftover pros and cons once we're done with exhausting our brains.
That's good. But I'm going to throw a curveball at you for the very first
Okay.
one, because my very first thing that I have on my list, and I didn't do this on purpose. I wrote pros, and then I wrote a list, and then I wrote cons, and I wrote a list. And it just so happened that the very first thing on each list was the same thing. And that's the size of the filter.
Okay.
Now, as far as the pro side of it is, with a filter the size, and we can use the FX series, we can use the I'm forgetting it now, the Marine Land. What is the who cares? The Marine Land has a really good canister filter. The size of these filters is so much larger than what you're going to get in your hang on the back. So the amount of water that they're processing is going to be so much higher than hang on the back filters, particularly when you get into the FX series. For crying out loud, those are like 5-gallon buckets. I mean, they're absolutely massive, particularly the FX6. But the size of it is, you just look at it and you're like, oh, that's sending a lot of water through there. I mean, and in certain situations, like this one behind me, like my African cichlid tanks, the larger the filter, the more water that it's processing, the better off you're going to be. And the size also contributes to some of the other pros that I'm going to talk about. But the sheer size of it to me is a pro, but it's also a con. Because
All right. Well, so go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to continue with it, because the
No, no,
con
no.
of the size is the fact that, if you're somebody that struggles with back issues like I do, and you have to pull that daggone thing out from underneath your aquarium to work on it, that size is going to be a problem. So the size is a good thing. I don't mean to sound weird when I'm talking here, but size is a good thing, but it's also not a good thing, depending on you.
Right. And that's what I was going to say too on the con side of things is, for those who've never worked on a canister filter, especially when you're talking about the big ones, the FX2s, 4s, 6s, to get that thing out of it, remember that thing's filled with water, it's filled with media, you got hoses connected. It's definitely, it's a heck of a lot more work to get that out from underneath an aquarium. Not as big of a deal if it's just sitting on next to the side of one, because then it's like,
Right.
all right, well, I don't have to deal with that. I can just walk right up to it. So that's something to consider. But you mentioned something as a pro, and it is the gallons per hour, the amount of water that you're moving through that filter can be an advantage, a pro for sure. There's no doubt about it. It's one of the reasons why I put them on the tanks that are in the gallery, is because I wanted a decent amount of water moving through that aquarium. There is a downside to that, believe it or not, and that is, I would use my 125-gallon nano aquarium as an example. That flow is not adjustable. I can adjust where the flow is going, but I can't adjust the amount of flow necessarily coming out of the return. And so when you've got small fish, or you've got fish with, flowing fins, or guppies, or bettas, or angelfish that don't necessarily like to be blown around, now you've got this canister filter. And the advantage maybe to a hang-on back filter is there's a lot of really good filters out there that we talked about in that hang-on back filter video. If you haven't seen it, check it out, where there is really good control mechanisms. So if you want to make that flow a lot less for certain types of fish, you can do that and do it very easily. Not as easy to do with a canister filter outside of putting in sponges on returns and things like
Right.
that.
It's a good point. And we've actually had that scenario before where we put a canister filter on a tank that it really wasn't the best choice because we had fish in there that were getting blown into the front glass. I mean, it was not the right situation. And I think that leads into, we've kind of touched on it, but when should somebody be considering a canister? Uh, that's a scenario where you probably shouldn't. If you have what you're talking about, you got a lot of little fish, a lot of plants that you don't want blowing around, and some plants that's cool. Vallisneria wagging around, that's cool, but you might not want some of your other plants blowing around. There are situations where a canister filter is not going to be the best choice, but look at all of my tanks. My tanks, for the most part, have heavy hitters in them. The decor is rocks, so it's not going to be affected. And they're fish that actually appreciate a lot of current. So for me, the kind of fish I like to keep, canister filters are almost always going to be the way to go. Mm-hmm. So, okay, moving on to my next pro. And this is one I think you and I, Professor, might have a little bit of a debate on because I don't think you're particularly a fan of this kind of a thing. But I like, and this is a broad statement here, but I like the options for media that you have in canisters. I've heard you speak on like chemical media and biomedia and things like that. I am somebody who does utilize carbon. Again, the kind of fish I keep. Mm-hmm. And I like to use things like Matrix and Max Out from Fritz and things like that. I use those products. And the fact that there's so much opportunity, so much room for activities. We are really coming out with the movie quotes today. With almost all canister filters, you've got tray after tray after tray that you can put this stuff in there. The water's going to flow nicely through it. It's hidden in there. I understand that there's certain media that may not work as well with zero oxygen down there and all that. Okay, fine. But for things like carbon and stuff like that, I love how wide open it is. You can put a big fat bag of it down there and keep your aquarium from smelling like a sewer. And but that's just me. I think you might have a very scientific and very good argument against it, but I don't know. Let me hear it.
No, I don't have an argument against that. You can put more media in a typical canister filter compared to a hang-on back. I mean, that's just usually going to be a fact. The largest hang-on back filters that are on the market today are going to be things like your AquaClear 110, your Seachem 110, and your Marineland Pro 475. And those compartments, and I would say the AquaClear 110 has probably got the squarest, I guess, right, if you will, which makes it probably the easiest to pack out if you're using all those other types of media. And you're not going to get as much in there, but you still have a lot of space. So if you had, let's take an example of a 125, and I threw in 2 AquaClear 110s, all of a sudden you've got space for your sponge, which comes with the AquaClear 110. You've got the space for the activated carbon or some type of filter media, chemical media, whether that's activated carbon or Purigen or something like that. And you've still got plenty of space for filter floss. Do you have as much as if you were just running an FX4 on that tank? No. You might have as much in terms of square footage, but I don't know if you have as much really, truly useful space in terms of water flow and how the water is moving through the media, right? I think that's where the advantage of that canister filter, like an FX2 or 4, would come in over the AquaClear 110s. That being said, and this is the thing I've mentioned before, when it comes to biological filtration, it is 100% unnecessary to even have half of that or a quarter of that in most aquariums, even ones that are heavily stocked. And so I think we greatly overvalue space when it comes to biological filtration for housing microbes that go ammonia to nitrite, nitrite to nitrate, that first part of the nitrification process. Now, your point to the chemical filtration, yeah, there's an advantage there. Now, I don't run chemical filtration. I don't feel it's necessary, but like you said, and this is super important, and I hope this is something that people are understanding as we go through this video, it really is dependent upon your setup. You've got a very different situation going on with many of your tanks than I do, right? I'm talking about a 125-gallon nano fish tank, and even the other 125 that's got a canister filter. Yeah, there's some geophagus in there, but that's like the biggest fish I'm going to have. The rest of them are rainbow fish and snakeskin barbs and things that don't produce an obscene amount of waste.
Yeah, and to touch on comparing the hang on backs to it, if you take an FX4, I believe one of the trays in an FX4 is larger than the container or the compartment on the back of a AquaClear 110 or the Seachem 110. I mean, there's so much more room in there. And that's not only, and I approached it as if it was specifically for like chemical media and stuff like that, but it could be that you're just putting in more sponges in those trays and just using the canister filter as a gigantic sponge filter. Ain't nothing wrong with that either. Right. But for me, in the tanks that I use, I do like to incorporate some Purigen, some carbon, and things like that, and it just works out well for me. We all have our own tastes, but that's been my style that I've liked to run with there. And you're just not going to have the amount of space in any other type of filter than you would in the canisters. So bring a con to me here.
A con. Well, I'll bring the most obvious one, and that is cost. Typically speaking, the cost of a canister filter is going to be substantially more than the cost of a comparable hang-on back filter. Now, that cost difference is going to be reduced if you're looking at a 6-foot tank. And now I am running a couple of AquaClear 110s or Seachem Tidal 110s or a couple of Marineland Pros 475s. If I'm doing that, well, yeah, the cost is going to double for the hang-on back filter, but often it's still going to be less than a comparably equipped canister filter, like your FX2 maybe would be more comparable to two AquaClear 110. So there is a cost associated with that, and it's something you have to consider, right? You have to consider that when you're trying to set up your fish tank and all the equipment that's going with it, lights and filters and heaters and all that stuff, is how much money do you want to spend? And yeah, those FX, unless you're getting them on a Black Friday deal, those FX246s, I haven't bought an FX series because the flue balls I have are actually the 407s, which I actually really, really like. I like those canisters a lot, but I don't know what non-Black Friday deal FX246s typically cost. I mean, they're many hundreds of dollars. I know that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the high threes for the FX6. But again, it totally depends on where you're buying it from. You might have people that are ripping off the industry and selling them for cheaper than that on Amazon. But, you're going to be under $350 if you find a really good deal on an FX6. The other two, I haven't checked the prices on in a while. I'm very fortunate to have a very good relationship with Fluval, and they sent me a FX6 in 2013 that I still could run right now. It's not hooked up. It's under my sink over here, but I could hook it up right now and run it if I wanted to. It's just a workhorse, and it just never stops. I also have an FX5 that still runs, going way, way back. The filter's probably a lot older than the FX6, and still runs perfectly fine. So, but listen, I cannot argue. They are more expensive, way more expensive. Even your, I don't even know what to call them. Your lower end hang-on backs, or excuse me, canisters are still going to be significantly more expensive than the hang on the backs. But it's, I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like the difference between a 4-cylinder and a V8. You want that extra power, you want that extra horsepower. You gotta pay a couple grand extra for that truck if you want that big motor in there. Same kind of a thing. Are they worth the money? In my opinion, yes. But there's no getting around it. I mean, they spend so much, or they cost so much. My thing is, when we talk about the aquariums that we talked about in the beginning, when you're getting into the larger tanks, your 125s, your 150s, can you do those on the cheap? I mean, you're spending a lot of money already anyway. Why are you going to cheap out when it comes to the filter, which is the lifeline, the life support system of your aquarium? Why are you going to cheap out on that? No, spend the money. You already spent $1,000 on the tank. Spend another $300-400 on the filter and do the right thing. But anyway, now, were you done with that con? There's not a whole lot more that can be said on.
I've got a bunch
price.
more cons, but yeah, I'm done with that one. Just
Yeah,
cost,
I'm sure you've got more. This is fun. My next one was going to be. I think I'm going to skip it. I'm going to say it, but I think I'm going to skip it because I pretty much already covered it. Powerful pump that processes a lot of water. That kind of goes right back to size. I mean, these are filters that process a ton of water, and they do it very, very efficiently. We've already covered all of that, so
well, there's one part that we didn't cover with the Pro, and I don't know if you're going to cover it later, and that is the way the water flows throughout the aquarium.
Yeah. Right, so don't steal that. Don't steal that from me.
Go ahead. You do it. Go. Because I segued into it right there for you. Take it as a pro because I don't have a comeback for it. So go ahead.
No, that's fine. And that's not the one I was going to do, but I will do it because you brought it up. It is true. If you buy a hang on the back filter for a 6-foot tank, you're going to probably want to incorporate some type of a circulation pump of some type, because even the strongest hang on the back filter is probably not going to have the water moving on the complete opposite end of the tank very well. Whereas with a canister, it's not a special feature. They all have it. You can put your input on one end, you put your output on the other end, and you shoot that water straight down. A lot of canister filters, I know all the FX series have these. The 7 series from Fluval has them. The Marineland has them. There'll be more than one output, so you can direct one towards the front and one going towards the back, really circulating that water through there. You're not going to get that with a hang on the back filter, which is one of the primary reasons why you recommend, and I do too, 2 hang on the backs for a 6-foot tank. If you're going to go with hang on the backs, 2 Tidal 75s, 2 Tidal 110s, so that you have that movement on both sides. Whereas with the canister filter, it is built right in there. And some of them, the Aquarium I know has this. And I'm drawing a blank. I know it's a feature you can buy extra for the others. A spray bar that you can buy where you can have that going across the back, or you can be real fancy and put it on the side wall of your aquarium and send that water straight down. That's really, really neat to be able to do that. I've used a couple with spray bars. I like them. It's not a required feature for me, but I do like the spray bar. So the direction of the water, it's not adjustable as far as the volume of water, like you were saying earlier. That was a good point. But you can direct where you want that water to go, giving you a much more efficient aquarium. So directional flow and putting that flow where you want it, instead of your input and your output being in one place, which is great. Instead of it being in one place, you can move them where you want. I think that's a huge pro. I don't even think you're going to have a comeback for that one.
No, there's no comeback for that. And that's one of the reasons why I put them on the tanks in the gallery, to maximize water flow within the aquarium. Return and the intake are on completely opposite sides of the tank. You're not going to get any better flow throughout the entire aquarium than doing that. And like you'd mentioned the spray bars, the Oaza, the Biomaster 850s that I've got, and even I think this is a 350 in the low boy, they all come with those things, and you can certainly use that. You can create surface agitation. Sometimes people will say as a con, I don't actually think it's a con, that you don't get enough surface agitation with your canister filters. I'm not even going to say that as a con, because you can. If you position your returns the right way, you're going to get more than sufficient surface agitation for gas exchange. But I do have, even more so than the cost, I'm just going to come out firing on all cylinders here. There is the massive, massive con of a canister filter: maintenance. Maintenance is the thing. And they're just like, I don't have a comeback for flow. It's really hard to argue that a canister that basically, in my opinion, a canister filter is by far the most cumbersome type of filter in the aquarium hobby, bar none, to maintain. So hang on back filters. Let's just say scenario, you got the 125. I got a couple of Aqua Clear 110s, Seachem Tidal 110s, whatever. To maintain that filter, I grab the filter, the little media box, take it over to the sink. I rinse things off in water, back in the hang on back they go. I didn't even get my elbows wet. I didn't even turn you could turn the filters off if you want to, if it's a Seachem Titles. You put those things back on. As soon as you fill the water up, the thing self-primes, boom, done. It took literally maybe 4 minutes to do that. Maybe. Right. And that's not exclusive to the Seachems or the Aqua Clears. That's any hang on back filter you've got. So maintenance once a week, 4 minutes, maybe if you're lucky, done. And now you've got fresh, brand new media capturing all this stuff. Canister filters. Let me explain what I'm about to do. Not this weekend, next weekend, because I got to plan time for these 5 aquariums. I actually have to plan a couple of hours to go into these 5 aquariums, get the canister filter out, break those freaking things open, inspect all the media, replace what needs to be replaced, rinse what needs to be rinsed, put that all back together, get the tops back on and get those things flowing again. You got to sit there with the stupid priming thing, and you're priming those ridiculous things, making sure the water gets back in. You got like canister priming elbow problems going on, tunnel of both wrists, black eye, who knows what else is going on. By the time you're done, you're sweaty, you're dirty, your back hurts because, like we already said, they're heavy, and the last thing you want to look at that point is your aquarium, even though it's going to look amazing when you're done. You're like, yeah, I just need to go lay down. So now, and I will tell you, if I had my choice, this is my controversial statement of the day, I wouldn't have canister filters back here at all. There would not be a single canister filter anywhere in my home. What? Explain why. I've got sponge filters for my breeding tanks. I would have hang on back filters for anything up to a 125, even in the gallery. If I wanted to really do this the way I wanted to do it, sumps. There'd be sumps, because those are crazy easy to maintain too. All I got to do is go in there and change a filter sock. Boom, done, over. That's another 2 minute, maybe 90 seconds. I got friends who've got sumps. They take the canister sock, they take the intake sock, not the intake, the intake sock off. They rinse it out in the sink. They throw it in the dishwasher or in the washing machine. They have another one that they put on there, and they just do that like once every week or two, and they're done. They got like a little bit of filter floss, and they just rip that top piece off, put a new piece on, done. So you sandwich, in my opinion, canister filters in between the hang-on backs and the sumps, and you've got this amalgamation of a compromise on both ends. Oh, what? Okay, so maintenance, absolutely horrific. I hate it. And you have to be honest with yourself. Now, some people don't mind it. There is a pro to the maintenance side, and I don't know, I will say it if you don't want to, but there is one pro to the maintenance side compared to a hang-on back filter. I think it's minor, but there is one. But yeah, I can't stand it. And you have to be honest with yourself. If you're a lazy person who doesn't like to do filter maintenance, you got to think about that when you're doing a canister filter for sure.
Okay, first of all, my bold statement that's going to break the internet just got a whole lot more bold.
Yes.
Thanks to you.
Are you going to say it now?
No.
Oh,
I'm not.
You're waiting. It's in your back pocket, huh?
I'm not ready, but I am going to give you my rebuttal to what you said, because maintenance is something that I also had both as a pro and as a con. I know that probably sounds crazy to you, but here's why I like it. Okay. I love hang on the back filters. I agree with you 100%. They're so easy to maintain, but here's the thing. You cannot, I don't care who you are. If you disagree with me, you're lying. There's no way you're going to maintain a hang on the back filter and not get water all over the place. It just happens, whether it's on your lids or dripping down the back of the tank or whatever it is. Now, you and I both have all of our aquariums in a place where if that happens, it's okay. But, if this is in your living room, that might not be okay. So the number one thing, I agree with you. because like I said, I have it as a con. They're heavy, they're burly, they're big, and it's not exactly fun to maintain a canister filter. However, there's one thing about them that I absolutely love, which is the fact that I can remove it and I can take that, which is exactly what I do. I can take that canister filter. It is heavy, sure. I can take it out of this building and I can take it out into my driveway and I can take my hose and I can spray the things that I need to spray or want to spray or whatever. You and I both use tap water to clean our sponges and we don't make apologies for it. I love that about it. Or we have in here, I think you have one in your basement too. We have a slop sink, laundry sink, whatever you want to call it. I can take the whole unit. It is heavy. I got a bad back, so I don't enjoy it, but I can take the whole thing, bring it over there, and it's all contained in that sink or in my driveway, and I don't have to worry about getting water all over the place. I love that about it. So when you get it outside, you can be a little bit more negligent in the way you're doing things. Throw the sponges over there. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be all delicate trying to make sure you don't drip that poopy water from the sponge on your carpet. And, I don't want to hassle with that. It's a hassle to get it out there, but once I get it out there, the job is so much easier to be able to do that. So I look at maintenance as a pro and a con. Probably more of a con, but it's also a pro.
There's one other pro. I'm going to help you out here too. Allow me to help
Please
you
do.
with this heavy hitter.
I hope it's not what I was going to say.
I just threw at you.
Oh,
the one thing that is true is I'm not maintaining these canister filters every week. Hang-on backs in our fish room must be maintained every week for them to do the mechanical filtration I need them to do. Of the 5 tanks that we've got set up here now, they've been set up for a few months. I've only inspected one of the Fluval 407s after about maybe a month. I'm like, oh, this thing looks perfect. Lid went back on, went right back in. I haven't even looked at the other 4. I can tell in the 125s, it's probably about time I take a closer look at those, just because you can kind of tell when the water is not quite as crystal clear as it normally is. Yeah, there's probably some media in there that needs to be cleaned or some floss that needs to be changed out. But it's been, I don't know how long, it's been a few months that these tanks have been set up now, I think. And now I'm going to go in and maintain them. But even with that, still, the amount of time I'm going to spend when I actually do get in there is still going to be way more time than what I did to maintain the hang-on back filters on the other side on a weekly basis. But they don't have to be maintained quite as often. But the downside to that is you can forget about them in a hurry, and now you've got some more work to do. I think you've had experience with that, haven't you?
I was just about to say, I am the idiot that let a filter go 3 years. And I'm not proud of it. And I can't even explain to you how it happened. But it was in a tank that's right here behind me. Fish were fine. The tank looked great. I was doing my water changes in the tank. It was full of peacocks for years. And it was just one of those things that it just didn't happen. I'm not lazy. I wasn't avoiding it. It just never happened. And it was still running and it was still filtering the tank perfectly fine after 3 years. Oh, was it a murder scene inside of that thing? It was horrible, but it was still working. I did a whole video about it. It was shocking to me that after 3 years, and this was not an FX filter. This was the Aquarium. And it was after 3 years of not touching it, it was still running. You can't say perfectly because that would be a lie, but it was still doing its job. And it's embarrassing, but it's also like, hey, you're welcome, Aquarium. That's probably as good a promotion as I can give for you. Yeah, I mean, when I maintain canisters, it's about once a month. I'm not going to do them every week. It's not necessary. I mean, you can do it. It's not going to hurt it, but it's not necessary to do that on canisters. So yeah. Did you, you said you were going to like drop some kind of a bomb. Is that what that was? Was that you don't have to work on them as much, or?
Well, yeah, the thing was that I would never have a single canister filter in anywhere in my home, because I'd either go hang on back, sponge filter, hang on back, or straight to the sump if I could.
Okay.
But these tanks aren't drilled. I wasn't about to undertake that process. But yeah, that's a
I'd like to come out now with my number one pro about canister filters. And my number one pro will lead into my bomb dropping moment, my nuclear event that's going to happen here after I talk about the number one pro. There is not a filter on this planet that you're going to find that is quieter than a canister filter. I'm sitting in this room right now. This is my favorite place in the world to be. I love this place. It's amazing. You can't hear it on the microphone, but it is very loud in this room. We got air pumps over here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tanks with sumps. I'd switch everything to sumps. And I don't care who you are. I don't care where you're from. I don't care how much money you paid. Sumps are loud. They just are. They're extraordinary filters. They're amazing, but they're loud. And I don't like that. I don't like that in my house. I don't like that in my fish house. I don't like aquariums that make noise. I cannot stand the sound of air pumps. It's the worst to me, that constant vibration. It makes me want to put my head through the wall. And the sound of running water, I love that in my pond. In fact, I asked the guys, do as much of that as you can. Make that pond as loud as possible when we built it. There's 4 waterfalls on my pond because the more trickling water I can hear, the better when I'm out there. But when I'm in my living room or sitting in my office, I don't like the noise. And so my number one pro is the silent operation of canister filters. And that leads me to this next statement.
Well, and before you get to the next statement, 100% I agree with you. That's why I chose them for the gallery, because they are, if you're hearing anything, it's the fish room and it's filtration over there. There isn't a peep to be made on this side. So 100% agree with you. Okay, go.
I'd like to apologize ahead of this statement to custom aquariums. I'd like to apologize ahead of this statement to any other manufacturer of aquarium filtration or aquarium devices. I do not want to lose any friends. I don't want to lose any relationships over this. My bold statement to you, Jason Adams, the professor, is if I had my way, and I, with my connections, could probably make this happen. If I had my way, I would do the opposite of you. And every single aquarium that I own would be run on canister filters. Now, you're thinking, well, that's just dumb, John, because you've got a 29-gallon sitting there, a 15-gallon. You've got all Elisa's 10 gallons. Yeah, well, that's what they make Shark Pros from CJ for. That's a canister filter. It's just an internal canister filter. All of the options, all of the pros that we just talked about, and much less of the cons, are incorporated into the Shark Pro 2. Now, I'm not doing an advertisement for Shark Pros. I'm just saying there are canisters for small aquariums too. When you get really small, that's when you can move into the Shark Pros. So for those, I would do that. But this tank behind me, my 240-gallon African cichlid tanks, Lisa's brand new 300-gallon, I would put canister filters on all of those. And here's the problem. I'm not rich. If you think about the bruisers, the dogs, the heavy hitters that I've got in this tank behind me, the long spaghetti poops that they have in there, the Lincoln log size poops that the bikers lay, and all of the mess that the African cichlids make constantly, they never stop. I would not be able to get away. I'm sorry, Fluval. I love the FX series. I think it's the best on the planet, but one FX6 is not going to handle this tank. So I would have to have, I would think, a minimum of 2, but probably 3 on this tank, because I'm weird like that. The 240s, I would probably want two FX6s on those because they've both got dozens and dozens of African cichlids in them. And, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. It's a lot of water to move around. And those fish like a fast current. Lisa's tank, we haven't revealed what we're putting in her tank yet, but we're going to need some significant waste control in there too. So probably at least two in her 300 gallon. My two 125s and my two 75s, well, guess what? They're already run on canister filters. They've got FX4s and FX2s, and then my 90 gallon has an FX2 on it. So I'm already running canisters on there. If I was in a perfect world, there would not be a sump in this room. And that is not because sumps aren't good. Sumps are amazing. They're great. Probably the best filtration you could ever have. Everything you said earlier, the maintenance and all, it's so easy on sumps. And you want to talk about not having to maintain canisters all that often. Well, double that for sumps. I mean, you don't have to touch them. No. But they're loud. I don't care who you are. I don't care what brand it is. They're loud. And I don't like that. So for the sole purpose of making it quiet in here, not because they're better performers, because I don't think they are, but for keeping things quiet, I would transfer, is that the right way? Transition everything over to canister filters in this fish house. Everything, even the 10 gallons would have canister filters in them. And guess what? You could walk in here and it would be silent. And that's what I want. So it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I think a lot of what you said has validity, right? And hopefully what people are picking up on is it really depends on what your priorities are, because you want all canister filters in your area. I would love to eliminate all canister filters in mine and go with sumps and hang-on backs, but you have to understand what the goals are, right? So for instance, if I were going sumps here, they're still far quieter than most hang-on back filters. They're still not getting picked up by these mics, just like they're not getting picked up by your mics. And so I don't mind a little bit of noise. I mean, this is in my house. We deal with this 24/7. We've got the central air system. It's a pump system, but we hear that. We hear the water trickling. We hear all that stuff every day for forever. I mean, it's just, you get used to it after a while. You almost get ear blind to it, if that's a word.
I know what you mean.
So and we'll have to talk about sumps at some point, but the reason why I love the sumps is you're getting by far the most filtration you could possibly get, but there are so many other benefits, like being able to grow plants down there, being able to put fish down there temporarily if they're getting beat up in a tank. You don't have a quarantine tank, the same water parameters. They can go down there. You can put lights down there. There's tons and tons of things. The only other con that I want to mention, I think it's the only other one, is energy. These cost a lot of money. And I can give you an example. In our area, when I had 80 tanks up and running, and on this side I did, and not only did I have all the lights, I had a couple heaters, about as many heaters as I do now on this side, because I do use some heater backups over here just because most of my heating is on the other side. And I had, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 hang-on back filters, big ones, right? Like the AquaClear 110s, the Seachem Tidal 110. And all of that lighting, if you remember seeing this side, what used to be the fish room with those 45 tanks, tons of lights. I took all that down, took all the hang-on back filters out, took all those heaters is basically a wash. My energy bill went from the Chicagoland area around, and I heat the room for the most part, was around $180 a month. It went up to $210. So that's because, almost exclusively, it's because of these canister filters. So think about that for a second. 5 tanks. I went from 45 tanks on this side down to 5, a whole lot less lighting, removing all of those hang-on back filters, adding the canisters, and the cost of the electricity went up by, what is that, like over 10%?
Wow.
So there's a cost there to that I don't think enough people really consider, which is why people ask, why are you running sponge filters on those other 40 tanks you have on the other side? Because could you imagine, even with a hang-on back, I don't have enough power circuits down here to run that kind of stuff. So
right.
Something to consider. Clearly, you mentioned, again, do you like maintaining filters? If you don't mind maintaining canister filter, but to me, that's the biggest downside, or one of them. It's pretty much the biggest downside. So if you don't mind that, then everything I've said doesn't matter to you. So then, yeah, canister filters make a lot of sense. If you've got big bruisers like John has in his tanks, you better figure something out, because the hang on back filters might not be able to compensate for those big fish. But for me, I don't have those. So I don't have to think about that. I don't have to think about the big dookies on the bottom of the aquarium that are messing everything up. I don't need that massive water flow. So again, you have to consider your own situation.
Yeah, and I don't like cleaning filters. I like doing water changes. That's kind of fun, and I enjoy it. The satisfaction of how it looks when you're done and stuff. It's great. Filters, not a big fan. And what I'm even less of a fan of is having to be delicate about it, which I don't have to do anymore down here in this building. But when we were keeping aquariums in our house that had tile floor and sometimes even carpet, you got to be careful. Don't get a drop of water. Oh, that was too much of a hassle. So being able to take that canister outside, make all the mess I want, and then bring it back in and hook it all up was a good thing. I appreciated that very much. And
I have
the fact that you don't have to do it as much.
I have a question for you. All right. So here, you ready?
I'm ready.
Here's your scenario. You put in brand new hardwood floors in your living room. I mean, you spared no expense. You also put in a 125-gallon aquarium with your brand new hardwood floors. Which filtration method do you trust more to not eventually put water on the floor? 2 Seachem Title 110s or a canister filter?
Oh boy, you went
big
and done
dollars,
it,
man.
you?
I mean, you went all out. Wife is extremely happy. She doesn't want the tank in there. She's super worried about it. You got to pick a filtration system that you know is least likely to put water on the floor. And obviously, there are other options there, but I'm saying out of the 2.
What am I keeping in the tank? It doesn't matter. I would probably go.
I mean, I know I'm giving you a simplistic thing. It actually does matter, because all those things make a
Well, for me,
difference,
it doesn't matter because we know what I'm putting in it. I would go with the 2 110s, and I'm going to tell you why. Because of what you just said. Because I can't get a drop of water on the floor. And it's not the maintenance side of it that would make me do that. It's the fact that when you go to a canister filter, you've got these hoses that come out, and there are connections in those hoses that can come apart. And I haven't had it happen to me, but it can happen, and it has happened. They come apart, and your tank, your 2 things happen. The filter empties out in your house and burns up because it's dry. So you lose your filter and you do all that damage to the floor. Anytime you're taking water out and taking it somewhere else, processing it and bringing it back, you have that risk. Sure, there's a risk in a hang on the back filter, but it's much less. I would go with the hang on the backs.
But you probably wouldn't, because there's other options, right? I mean, you mentioned it. Maybe not with a 125, but if you had a smaller tank, you got those sharks. Now it's an internal canister filter. You've got the best of everything, right? You're
absolutely nothing to worry about.
Unless the tank breaks, there's no opportunity for water to go on the floor, period. So, and by the way, I do like that. Well, that's a topic we're going to have to talk about at some point, the internal canister filters, because they do have their place. I did that YouTube short with the shark. That thing absolutely cleaned up a tank. I mean, the substrate, everything, within 12 hours of me putting it in there with a very heavily stocked tank. And it made the water look crystal clear. It was very impressive.
It rocks. We're going to have a special deal on those at Aquashella coming up in May. If you're watching this and plan on attending in Dallas, Jay and I are putting together a special deal there for Aquashella attendees. But hey, listen, I've got one more con. Aren't you so happy?
Okay. I am happy. Let's finish it off on a downside.
Well, you did touch on it very briefly, but it is a huge con for some people. And it actually, dare I say it, it made me throw a filter away. And that is priming.
Yeah.
Priming is a not fun thing. There is one exception that I know of. There might be another, but I only know of one exception that's not a problem. But priming is the devil on a lot of canister filters. I have gone up and down and up and down and up and down so many times with some of these canisters, and it just doesn't seem to work. I had one, I'm not in the business of disparaging brands, so I'm not going to do it, but there was one in particular. I was doing a series of videos about canisters. I bought it with my own money, went to a store and bought it. And I was like, no, I can't get this stupid thing to run. And the prime just never worked. And I'm an experienced guy. I could not get this thing to work. If you're not familiar with canisters, what priming means is basically filling the system with water, because canister filters the intake runs off gravity. And if there's air in the system and not water in the system, it's just not going to work properly. So to fill it all up with water and get it running is called priming. The exception, again, is the FX series. They're like the Title 110s. You put them in, you plug it in, boom, it starts working. It primes itself. To my knowledge, it's the only filter on the market that does. Yeah, you have to put water in the bucket before you close it all up, but you put water in the bucket and you plug it in and boom, it starts running. It burps out all that extra air and then it's running like perfect. So, in fact, I think every 12 hours or whatever it is, it purges itself, and it's the most sophisticated, most high-end, best Bentley Rolls-Royce filter out there. But if you're not buying an FX series, you're priming your filter, and that is a downside for sure. Some of them are easier than others, but you don't want to hassle with that. One of the easiest to me was the Marineland. Just a couple of with the little thing on the lid, and it was no problem.
Well, here's an even better one, and I don't know if you noticed this at Aquashella last time. The Oaza, some of those canister filters, the priming mechanism is on top of the tank. It's next to one of the tubes, so it's this little thing. You're like, you don't have to lean down. You're not under the tank. You're like toot 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 toot, and the thing. I mean, it just fired right up. So
that's how the CJs are. The CJs are that way too, and that is nice because you're not getting down there underneath the tank and doing all of that. It definitely is a good system. And I do need to mention,
maybe no, I'm sorry. No. I misspoke. It wasn't Oaza. It was a CJ. Okay. It was a CJ filter that was doing that. Yeah, I misspoke. I'm sorry. Cause that was the one that we were running in the booth. My bad.
Well, and, needs to be mentioned. I'm not allowed to talk about this top secret information, but, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it. You're not hearing it from me, but perhaps a brand that you just mentioned is going to be releasing an all new designed canister filter in the very near future. I don't know who said that. I didn't hear anybody say that. I don't know what they're talking about. But I maybe know a few things, and this could be a really good thing coming out here in the very, very near future. In fact, I was supposed to go overseas for the release of that, but anyway, very excited about that. And it could be a game changer like so many of their other products are, but I don't want to get in trouble by talking about that too much. Shame on me. I thought about something while you were talking, and I was like, I need to make sure I bring that up before the end. And it totally escaped me. It's not that I wasn't listening to you.
Closing in on 50.
Well, I know. I mean, that's why you're so forgetful lately. That makes sense. Maybe it's coming for me too, but no, I don't remember what it was, but I had a really good point that I was going to talk about, and I don't remember it. So that's unfortunate.
Thanks for
that. But yeah, my bold statement, if I could do it, I would transition all of these tanks. Saltwater tank, I wouldn't be able to do it because, you got the protein skimmer and all that stuff in there. So that would have to stay in. But, I remember what it is. Thankfully, I said that. I do remember the one thing that I wanted to say. It sounded like I was disparaging Custom Aquarium's seamless sump. I've got 4 of them in operation right now. I am absolutely in no way whatsoever disparaging that product. I love that product, not because I have a relationship with Custom Aquariums. I love that product because it is a great filter. And if you're somebody that's thinking about, John's 240s, that's like the best footprint. It's that 30-inch tall, really nice looking tank. I think I want to get one of those, but he said the sumps are loud. Here's the thing that I'm going to say. If you have one, it's really not that big of a deal. You hear a little bit from the sump. It's nothing overwhelming. But when you have 5 in one room, it gets a little bit loud. It's a wide open room with wood walls and concrete floors. It can be a little bit loud when you've got all of them. And they're all the biggest sump systems that Custom Aquariums has available. So it makes a lot of noise when you put them all together. But if it was just one, I would have no issue whatsoever. Having one in my living room, it'd be no problem. But when you have as many of them as I do, and this one's fully exposed. I mean, I've just got a curtain covering it up. It's a wide open stand. So, there's really nothing blocking that sound. So I wanted to be very clear about that. I'm a huge fan of the seamless sump. It's just that when you put a bunch of them together, they can be pretty loud.
Yep. That's true of many types of filters, except for most canisters.
Yeah. And I mean, you did say something earlier about hang on back filters being really loud. I don't know where you got that from. Hang on the backs aren't loud unless the fish keeper is lazy and lets the water go down. Then they can be loud. But
yeah, well, I mean, mostly what you're hearing, if you're hearing anything in my fish room, is the air pump for the central air system that runs all those sponge filters. But more so with the canister filters, with just the way, for some of the hang on backs, the way the water exits in the return, even if you've got your tanks filled up, you're still going to hear a little bit of that water trickle as well. So yeah.
And a little trickle doesn't bother me. It makes me have to pee, but it doesn't, ruin things for me. But to me, the best aquarium is a completely silent aquarium, whether that's in my living room or out here. I'm not interested in it. Outdoors, completely different, but in here and in my house, I want it to be silent. So anyway, I hope we covered all of the bases of hang on up. Jeez, I know we did hang on the backs. That was 4 weeks ago, but canister filters, I hope we covered it all. This is, I don't care what Jason says. I know he's a professor and everything, and he's very smart, but I don't care what he says. They're the best filters that anybody can use in a fish room that has all these big tanks in it.
Unless you need hang on backs or sumps.
That's true. Whatever filtration you prefer, that's what's best. But no, they are great. They're not a filter to be afraid of. Yes, you are having water removed from your tank and then being put back in, and that's a little bit risky, but welcome to the world of keeping glass boxes full of water. There's a risk in everything that we do, so you just have to deal with that. But I love canister filters. I think they're easy to maintain because you can take them outside and slop them all over the place. Yeah, they're heavy and that sucks, but I love how silent they are. I love all the options for media. I don't like how much they cost. But hey, we all have our preferences. And if I had it my way, I would cancel myself, get myself canceled, and I would take out all of my filters in this room and I would use all canister filters in there. That's how much I love them. Which nice. I didn't even realize at this point I'd be copying you if I did that. And that's a shame.
Right. You can get a shirt that says, I love canister filters, or maybe a little pin. I think John needs a pin that says, I love canister filters.
I love canister filters, and on the back it would say, I don't care what Jason says.
Nice.
But anyway, this was a whole lot of fun to do. I love being able to talk about equipment. It's my favorite thing to talk about. You want to really get me excited? Let's start talking about lawn equipment or woodworking equipment. Oh boy, I could go all day long, but fish keeping equipment gets me excited too. So this really was a whole lot of fun, and I appreciate you all sticking around here till the very end. And Jason, even though I think you were so wrong on so many other things today, I appreciate your input on this too. This was a blast.
Absolutely. Yep. Thank you so much. And everybody, we will be back same time, same place next week. Next week, we're going to be talking about quarantine. Super important. It is one of the single most important things you can do in the fish keeping hobby. If you get this right, fish keeping hobby gets a lot easier. So thank you for being here. We'll see you next week.